Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, CRE Emerging Trends, Renewals, Amenities, and What's Next in 2026. Today's webinar is brought to you by Grace Hill's Kingsley Surveys, and we're going to talk a lot about tenant sentiment coming out of our Kingsley surveys for this past year and the trends that you should be looking forward to in 2026. But before we dive in, I want to introduce my amazing co-host for today, Katie Jeffers. She is the Director of Support Services, specifically Survey here at Grace Hill. And Katie oversees all of the reporting and analysis for all of our Grace Hill Kingsley Surveys programs. She is my go-to here for anything survey related. And in her 10 years at Grace Hill, Katie has worked directly with clients to implement and manage their survey programs, whether it's tenant experience, resident experience, employee engagement, and so much more. She is a manager of our reporting insights, and through that, she knows the keys to customer success across both the commercial and the real estate industries. Now, before Katie joined us here at Grace Hill, she had multiple roles in consumer research and in revenue analysis. And super fun fact, if you didn't know this about Katie, she served in the Peace Corps in Albania, of all places. So very interesting background there. Thank you, Katie, for joining us. All right, and my name is Jen Tyndall. I am the VP of Strategic Insights here at Grace Hill. Among my responsibilities for my role includes working very closely with the survey team on thought leadership and also partnerships and strategy for the firm. All right, without further ado, let's talk about what is in store for you all today. We're going to cover return to office, amenities that are key to overall tenant satisfaction, renewal trends, and specifically that those renewal trends are displaying some uncertainty among tenants today. We'll also talk about sustainability, which was the most surprising segment of our team's analysis this year. So it's fascinating. I can't wait for you guys to hear that one in particular. And then last but not least, we will save time at the end for Q&A. So drop your questions in the chat, use Zoom's Q&A function. However you want to contact us with your questions, please do it. We can't wait to hear from you. And if I happen to see them in the moment, then we'll go ahead and address them then, but otherwise we will be sure to cover them during Q&A. All right, let's talk about what you're going to learn today. So the top 3 learnings for 2026 are that building amenities are now more important than ever before. And sustainability, as I mentioned, the big surprise, is now even less important. Now, this may not be surprising to those of you who've read the news for the last year, but it's interesting to see that reflected in tenant sentiment. We're going to talk about that in more detail. And then last but not least, uncertainty is growing with regards to tenant renewal intent. Now, all of these insights, everything we're going to talk about today on the webinar, as well as a lot more detail, lives in our CRE Emerging Trends Report. This report right here, every single one of you who registered should have received this report early. It has not been published yet. It won't be published until next week. So we are very excited to give you early access to these insights. And I want to give a special shout out to our team members who helped produce the incredible data behind this report, specifically Kyle Brennan and also Richard Lewis. Thank you guys so much for your hard work on this report. And also a shout out to our marketing team. They put in so much effort to make this visually stunning and accessible for everyone, especially Tia Kimbrough. So thank you, Tia, for your help here as well. And last but not least, I do want to give a special shout out to our industry experts who contributed to the report: Charles Van Thiel from GRESB, Sarah Carreret from the Center for Active Design, also known as Fitwell, Dustin Sutton from Meissner Real Estate Services, Mark Fisher from Inspire CRE, and last but not least here, Janet Pogue from Gensler. So thank you all industry experts for contributing your insights to our report. Now, let's get started. All right, Katie, why don't you tell us more about office attendance and remote work, as we alluded to would be first up in the agenda.
Yeah, of course. It's always an exciting topic. It feels like it never gets old. And with so many big name companies kind of actively publicizing their return to the office, whether it's getting rid of hybrid work or going away from remote only to some form of that. It's been in the news, kind of all over the place. So does our data kind of line up with the headlines that we're seeing? And generally, the answer is yes. So in our Kingsley surveys, we ask tenants about their work attendance policy, and we're showing the results of that question here on this slide. And what we're generally seeing is those that say they've had an optional attendance policy has been steadily declining over the past 3 years. So generally matching what we're kind of hearing in the news media about return to work. And then likewise, those that say they're requiring a full return to work, that has steadily increased from just last year. So we saw it jump to 34% from 30%, saying that all employees must return to the office. So generally, we're seeing the same things that's being discussed, across the the landscape. And the return to office has kind of had this negative connotation associated with it, where employees feel like they're being forced to do something that they really don't want to do. And so, what we wanted to kind of think about is, was that really such a bad thing if employees have to go back into the office all of the time? And I know for many of you on the call, you're probably hoping that is what happens. Um, but we wanted to explore some other research around this topic as well. So not only look at our own data, but Gallup has tons of research about workers and all kinds of other just topics relevant to our everyday lives. And they examined loneliness in the workplace in 2024. So we've taken this chart here from their report last year. And they found that those that always work from home, and that red line is the place to direct your attention on this chart, 25% of those workers say that they're lonely. So it's a pretty high percentage of those that always work from home. Even those that sometimes work from home, 21% say they're lonely. You can see that's still substantially higher than the 16% that say they never work from home. And, when I was looking at this data and I thought, well, it does seem pretty reasonable that your average worker who's used to the conveniences of working from home probably will have a knee-jerk reaction to being forced, or what they perceive as being forced, to go back into the workplace. But what this data shows is that actually it might actually provide some benefits for them that they didn't really think about. There's one other point I'll make about this data before we move on, and that is at the bottom of this green chart, there's some percentages around loneliness based on employee engagement. So this is coming again from Gallup study. But what they found is those that are actively disengaged at work are also much more likely to be lonely. So I will make a plug here for another survey product that we have, employee engagement surveys, where we can do this research for you and give your organization answers about employee engagement. But I know
Yeah.
most of you want to just know about the actual physical workplace. So, so we'll turn back to that topic.
I will say though, this is so useful for property managers, owners who are managing properties and they need to give their tenants fodder for getting their employees back in the office. I feel like both of these trends would be really powerful from our data and from Gallup's data, and to Katie's point, employee survey data.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agree. It's one of many kind of, nuggets you can pull out of your toolbox to share.
Yes.
Um, and of course, we're not the only ones researching the workplace. Gensler has also done a study in 2025. And I'll quote Janet Fogg here, as Jen mentioned, someone contributing quotes about this. So she's saying employees are seeking more than just a good place to work. They're craving great experiences that foster connection, productivity, and well-being. So I love this quote because it directly kind of ties to what we were just talking about with regards to loneliness. And so this is again thinking about, if you own or manage a building, how you can create those spaces where these elements can thrive.
Totally. Well, and I do want to talk about and hopefully understand better for our audience, because Janet mentions these great experiences here. So, what
Mhm.
are some of those great experiences? What are we seeing in our data?
Yeah, she says amenities are no longer optional, and we would agree with that statement. So yeah, we can turn to our own data now, which I know is what you're all very excited about to see. So we asked about all kinds of rating areas on the survey, ranging from all kinds of different amenities and property features. And then we look at the correlation of those rating areas to tenant overall satisfaction, which is like our main KPI on the survey. And so what we're generally finding is that rating areas around property features and amenities are having a higher correlation to overall satisfaction than they have in the past. And that was an exciting, really interesting um, finding that we found this year, and we felt like it was important to communicate with all of you. And so we're looking at those rating areas that increased the most in their strength of correlation, starting with industrial. And I won't go through this whole list here because we'll have several other property types to get through. But I just wanted to point out even something like exterior appearance grew in importance to industrial tenants. We tend to think of them as just being focused on the output of what they do inside those spaces, but they do care about the whole experience. Office, we would expect more factors to be influencing that experience. And the top two areas that increased the most in correlation this year are access to food trucks and healthy food options. And this came as no surprise because if you attended our webinar last year, Jen and I spent quite a bit of time talking about food. And we've noticed that the topic of food comes up even in tenant freeform comments where we ask them what could improve their building experience. And they often mention food. So not surprising at all that this is an important part of the office tenant experience.
Yes, and worth pointing out that we've partnered with a company called Minnow that helps provide food delivery options. So for those of you that are bummed maybe because you're not in an area with great food, Minnow makes it really easy for you to get that food delivered in a way that is luxury, as opposed to just feeling like you're dumping a bunch of food on some sort of lobby desk or table type setup. So they're fantastic. And a lot of these areas too, you'll see another one of our partners on the commercial side is Building Engines. They have a Prism module and they can help you with maintenance, heating spaces, heating and AC, as you can see there below. So it's really worth checking out some of our partners that can help you with these areas too.
Yeah, one of the cool things that's been happening in the real estate industry is just creative solutions to kind of age-old problems. And we're seeing a lot more of that these days. It's really exciting.
Yes.
Um, for retail tenants, when you look at this list, you might think these seem like pretty basic property features. And for the most part, they are exterior cleanliness, ingress, egress, kind of the basics of operating a retail center. Very important to tenant overall satisfaction. You also see that green building commitment satisfaction with that is on this list as well. And so this is interesting because we're going to see later that rating of initiatives has generally declined in importance. So we'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. And then medical office, likewise, the green building commitment to green building satisfaction is also more highly correlated with tenant overall satisfaction this year. And then you see medical office just has a lot of areas that have increased importance. So we'll talk more about medical office here in a few minutes. So these are the actual overall satisfaction scores. We're just talking about the factors that, influence that. Here's what we're actually seeing with the trend line over the last 3 years. So in general, overall satisfaction scores are trending up. The one difference really is medical office. That's the one area where it has declined from last year. And generally, this decline for medical office is related to declines in other key performance indicators across the medical office property type, including management overall satisfaction, which has declined from last year. And that actually leads me to kind of my last point. about tenant overall satisfaction. So we definitely agree that amenities are becoming more important to the overall experience. But I do want to just restate that the top three rating areas that are have always been most highly correlated to tenant overall satisfaction are management overall satisfaction, management problem resolution, and management communication. So even though amenities are growing in importance, these three areas are still the top three, and they can't be neglected from a service delivery perspective.
All right. Well, this has been really helpful to get an understanding of overall satisfaction, which is so important to understanding the tenant experience. But I'm sure what a lot of our listeners today are wondering about is renewals, because renewals are ultimately what drives the bottom line, right, Katie? So could you tell us, are these trends that we're seeing in overall satisfaction, are they the same? Are they different? How does that vary with renewal intent?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things going on with renewal intent. And I'll mention that they, in general, are very closely related. So, in general, what we've kind of always seen over the years is that tenants with high satisfaction are more likely to renew than tenants with low satisfaction. So, the two are closely related. In general, we're also seeing renewal intentions increase year over year. But throughout 2025, there's been some really interesting changes um, quarter by quarter. So what we saw is, again, likely new renewal intent was increasing, but where we felt like the kind of interesting things that were happening quarter over quarter with those that were saying they were unsure about renewal. So that's what we'll explore over the next 4 slides. Starting with industrial tenants. So in general, in 2025, 66% of industrial tenants said they're likely to renew. 26% said they're unsure about renewals. That's what you see here on the chart. So a little bit of a decline in unsure renewal from last year, which is generally good. You want to see that number be going down. But what we found is when we looked at it quarter by quarter, that we were actually seeing the opposite. And in Q3, the percentage of tenants that are unsure rose to 29%. So we could see those numbers kind of shift after we close out 2024. The industrial sector does have the highest percentage of unsure tenants compared to the other property types. And we'll talk about those in just a minute. But before we do, I'll talk a little bit about some reasons for unsure renewal, because we do ask about this directly on the survey. And so tenants that are unsure about their renewal cited price as the most selected reason about being unsure at 28%. I don't think that probably surprises anybody. And then it was followed by building functionality and business circumstances, both cited around 12%. And then out of all of those factors that tenants can select from as influencing their renewal decision, price was the one that actually increased the most over 2024. So we did kind of think about speculating a little bit about, beyond just what our data shows, like why might we be seeing these trends. And certainly it's easy to imagine that macroeconomic factors are influencing some of this uncertainty for the industrial sector, especially when you think about trade policy and tariffs, and even some lingering effects from supply chain, that these could be influencing this perception.
I can only imagine how difficult it must be to be an industrial tenant right now with all of this uncertainty.
Yeah. So for office tenants, we're generally seeing the same pattern. So likely renewal is increasing in 2025. It was actually 70%, so typically higher than industrial. That's pretty normal. The percent of unsure tenants is a little bit lower than industrial. So in 2025, it's 24%. And you can see more or less in line with last year. But again, what we're seeing is quarter over quarter, and especially in Q3, the highest percent of tenants saying that they're unsure. And so in Q3, it jumped to 27% for office tenants. So factors that are impacting those that are unsure about renewal are somewhat similar to industrial. So price, once again, is cited the most frequently as the main reason for being unsure at 22%, followed by space requirements at 17% and business circumstances at 12%. But one difference is the factors that have increased the most from 2024 and percent cited are actually property management and quality of building. Both of those are being cited more frequently this year as a reason for being unsure compared to last year.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then retail, you can see even more positive in that the percent of tenants that are unsure about renewal is smaller. It's 20% this year, a little bit higher than last year. The percent of tenants likely to renew more or less remained the same year over year. Retail actually hasn't had a lot of big shifts in renewal intentions over the past 3 years. But again, when we looked at this quarter by quarter in 2025, the percent that say they're unsure was changing the most from quarter to quarter, going from 18% in Q1 to 21% in Q3. And then I'm going to actually sound like a broken record here. You can probably guess what I'm about to say next, which is that price is also the most frequently cited reason for being unsure about renewal, followed by sales performance at 14%, and then customer traffic at 14% as well. And then price also increased as a reason for being unsure about renewal compared to last year, but so did business circumstances and length of lease as well. And then medical office. So medical office, it's kind of doing some different things compared to the other property types. So it was the one property type to actually decline a little bit in overall satisfaction, but then we're seeing the opposite trend with renewal intentions, that likely renewal intent is increasing. The percent of unsure is declining. It's actually the lowest of the all 4 property types. The one thing it does, though, have in common with the other property types is that price is also the most selected reason for being unsure about renewal. So it is cited about 20% by tenants, and then followed by space requirements at 12% and corporate decision at 11%. Yeah. The area, though, or the factor for the renewal decision that increased the most from last year is building upkeep. So that kind of speaks back to the service delivery, management, maintenance influence on medical office. So I realize that kind of contradicts what I said earlier about, OSAT going up and usually renewal intentions follows. When we see the discrepancy like this in the data, it's often because there's other macroeconomic factors kind of influencing the situation, and healthcare demand is one thing that's remained pretty steady despite, or at least so far, despite economic circumstances. So that's one possible explanation as to why medical office is having kind of a different trend line than the rest of the property types.
That makes sense. It just seems like uncertainty is the theme, both in the data and among tenants. But what I am very interested in is we did see some more dramatic swings. I would arguably say certainty as relates to sustainability. So I'm very interested, Katie, to hear you talk more about that topic and share some of those insights with folks on the call today.
Yeah, so I think we were all a little surprised that the importance of sustainability initiatives has declined this year compared to last year. And obviously, the topic of sustainability has been a big part of the national conversation, really for a long time, but this year, kind of especially. It feels like, depending on who you ask, sustainability has more of a negative connotation than it has in the past. So we did spend a little bit of time kind of looking at political influences on the data, but I'm going to save that for the report. And we'll just spend some time looking at the regional data in the next 2 slides. Yeah. So, we named this section Sustainability Fatigue. because what these red dots here indicate is if the change from 2024 is negative, and you see there's a lot of red dots in each of these tables. All of the importance areas are listed here in each table in the same order, grouped by the region that they represent. So some regions have, all red dots indicating a decline across the board. Two areas actually increased, or for two regions, it increased. And then yellow dot representing no change across the board, or no change from this year to last year. So in some of those cases, the change was pretty large, 7% negative difference to last year. So we were thinking about what are some reasons that there's so much change across these reading areas compared to last year. We have a couple of different theories that I'll talk about a little bit here. We also talk about them in the report as well. But I'll start with the kind of the first idea, which is social desirability bias. Some of you might be familiar with that concept, but essentially in prior years, tenants could have felt kind of compelled to answer in a way that felt, socially desirable, socially virtuous, because in general, they're part of the national conversation had been that sustainability was important. So that could have influenced how they responded to the survey. Another kind of similar concept is the outgroup effect. So as perceptions around sustainability have kind of changed in the national conversation, and it was maybe associated with more of an extreme view on something, that could have also led to just, more stepping back from placing an importance on these initiatives. So that's another possible explanation for the data. And then a third possible explanation is that there's other initiatives out there that are really important and impact a building's sustainability, and we just didn't measure them on the survey. When we think about insurance premiums, those have increased substantially for most building owners over the past couple of years. And in 2024 alone, there was reporting that it was the highest number of billion-dollar weather devastation events, in the US. So it's obviously important. Cost, it's impacting cost. So there's probably more to it that, is just not showing up in our data. And the fact that sustainable operations, that kind of generic rating area that you see at the bottom of each of these tables, hasn't really changed, kind of speaks to there's probably some other areas we could be measuring that would influence these results. So I'll just kind of end with talking about that by saying we are going to review our survey content for 2026 to evaluate if we're measuring the right areas around sustainability.
Yes, and excited for those changes to come too.
So everything I just said probably felt really negative because there was all these negative changes from last year. But if you do look at the percent of importance rating for each of these areas, it's actually pretty high. So the green dot here represents that that percentage is over 2/3, and the red dot represents that percentage is under 2/3. And most of these areas across most of the regions have well over 2/3 of tenants rating that area as important. And some areas are rated even, as 81% important recycling program in the Northeast, for example. It's really just renewable energy that kind of consistently has the lowest importance rating here. So, so even though it's less important than it was last year, you should still be thinking about it. But this did interest us quite a bit, and we, as Jen mentioned, asked for some quotes from some of our partners and colleagues. And I think Sarah Carriat from Fitwell had a really great quote. I'm just going to actually kind of read what she said directly, which is, as traditional sustainability metrics plateau, owners and investors are recognizing that prioritizing health and resilience not only enhances tenant well-being, but also safeguards asset value against future shocks. We're proud to help real estate leaders turn these priorities into actionable design and operational strategies. So, what Sarah is saying is that her organization, a lot of real estate organizations out there are taking more a people first approach to sustainability and healthy buildings. And I think that ties really nicely back to what we were just talking about earlier, which is people that come into the office every day are less likely to be lonely than those that don't. So again, just to emphasize the importance of having a great place to work.
Yes, absolutely. This was so interesting and impactful, and I'm excited to see what we measure next year. For example, I know in the construction industry, building science has really grown as a terminology that's very interesting.
Mm.
I would argue it's the same as sustainability in a lot of ways, it's just called something else. So be very interesting to see what we measure next year. I'm excited for you all, so stay tuned. But thank you again, Katie, for all of this fantastic insight and advice going into 2026. Can you give some advice as well for firms, again, as they're approaching the end of the year and start of next year? What could they do differently? What should they change? What should they focus on? Please share your insight and best practices.
Yeah. Well, my first recommendation is going to be a little bit of a plug, which is if you haven't already surveyed in 2025, schedule your survey. We still have some room in December to schedule surveys. If you've never worked with Amy Fisher before, she's outstanding. She's our sales executive. So I'm sure she'd be happy to speak with you about getting your survey program up and running. And then regardless of whether you do a survey program or not, our general advice based on our years of data is respond to any kind of tenant request within 24 hours. Response times within 24 hours really lead to much higher tenant overall satisfaction than those tenants that say they typically receive a response outside of that time frame. So that's the first thing you can do. And if you do your survey with us, you'll get an actual measurement around it. And then follow up often with your tenants. Tenants do need and want check-ins. Even industrial tenants typically want to be checked in with at least once a year. So check in with them and preferably on a schedule that works for them. And again, that's another piece of information you'd learn from our survey program.
And once a year, I mean, that shouldn't be a lot of, you could just reach out for the holidays that are coming up, send them a nice little holiday gift of some sort, or even a card. I'm sure they'd appreciate that. Hopefully that doesn't take you more than 5 minutes to reach out to a specific tenant and then 5 minutes per tenant from there. All right. And then Katie, if you could just recap everything that we learned today, make sure everyone has their takeaways, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. So, yeah, just to recap with return to office, building amenities are more important than ever. And our own data is reflecting that it's having a larger impact on tenant overall satisfaction than it has in the past. A lot of those individual sustainability initiatives are less important than they were in 2024. And then, yes, even though the trend looks mostly positive right now for renewal intentions, we are starting to see some kind of unusual movement with a decline in renewal intentions throughout 2025.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this. And please, everyone, join me in thanking Katie. You can send her some love in the chat. She did a fantastic job presenting so much data, so many insights, and really distilling it down for all of us of what's critical and most important. So thank you, Katie. All right. And before we get to Q&A, I do need to talk to you guys about Grace Hill and Kingsley surveys because, again, we have so much valuable information for you as was displayed throughout this webinar so far, right? So one of the main reasons that folks survey with us is because of the Kingsley Index. We have the #1 commercial real estate index of tenant sentiment, probably globally, definitely in North America. And we can slice and dice the data all the ways that you saw today, whether it's by property type Or also we can slice and dice by property class. We do that for you in your results analysis presentation. After we've conducted the survey, we gather up the results and then we can slice and dice it 10 ways to one. And Katie is very instrumental in that process. We can also break it up by geography. So we've seen some very interesting analyses that way. And then last but not least, one thing to keep in mind about our Kingsley Index is that it is very relevant. We're only pulling data from the most recent 24-month period so that you can be sure you are getting the most current and up-to-date insights. And in case you're not aware of all of the categories that we cover in our survey, we cover a lot. So this is just a snapshot for you here, whether it's leasing and tenant improvements, amenities, as we talked about today, maintenance, service assessment, which can be the property manager and the tenant's experience with the property manager, as well as space needs. So when we are asking tenants, do you intend to renew? We're also asking them, how much space do you need? And that can really be a helpful talking point as you're having that conversation about whether or not that tenant intends to renew, especially as we talked about today, those unsure tenants, that typically pops up. Katie mentioned it a couple times, I remember. So very helpful to have those data points on a client by client basis. You also may not know that here at Kingsley Surveys, we not only offer tenant surveys, we also offer resident surveys, we offer investor surveys, employee engagement, occupant, the list goes on. So definitely reach out to us for any of these categories. It's certainly easier to have all of your surveys conducted in one spot, and we are happy to do that for you. Last but not least, surveys provide so much data, and Katie and I, as data nerds, we love it. And if you are not slicing and dicing and analyzing your data so many different ways, you're missing out because there is so much interesting information here, especially if you think about what AI can do with qualitative data these days and parsing all of the comments that you're receiving from tenants. It is phenomenal and incredible. And if you're not doing it, you gotta start now. The other fantastic aspect of our data specifically with the survey is that we also provide you that benchmark, the Kingsley Index, so that you can compare how you stand against your competitors. So that is, again, one of the main reasons that folks will survey with us here at Grace Hill with Kingsley Surveys. With that, I would love to hop into Q&A. So I am going to step into the chat and just see what questions that we have that folks have given us specifically. I know not everyone likes to do it in the general chat, so give me just a second. All right. Okay, we got a question. This might have been earlier. Someone asked, where can I get the full report? And that one is, I think, in the chat as well. Stephanie mentioned that it's next week. It's actually going live on the 27th on our website, so you can download it there, which is fantastic. And also thank you, Amy and Angela and Reese, for your feedback. We're so glad that you enjoyed the insights and found this informative. Please give us any and all feedback of what you'd like to see in the future too. We'd appreciate that. All right, another question here. If I have both retail and multifamily, can I still survey both with you guys? Great question. Katie, you want to answer this one?
Yes, yeah. So we focused on commercial tenant results today, but if you know Grace Hill, you know we also are big into multifamily. So yeah, we can do both survey programs for you.
Yes. Or if you have office and retail or whatever the
Yeah.
combo may be, it's pretty simple.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. Another one here. Can you talk about renewal trends by property class and region? Yes, we did mention that. Katie, do you want to talk more about our results analysis presentations?
Sure, yeah. So one of the pieces of the whole tenant survey program is a results presentation that will kind of conclude the project. You'll work with one of our fantastic project managers And they'll do a similar kind of deep dive into your own results like Jen and I did today. Actually go into even more depth on those presentations. And so they'll break down results by the attributes that are most important to you when you're looking at your real estate portfolio.
Yes, and they are so fun to sit in on. Anytime I get to attend a practice run or sit in on the full presentation, I do because it's so great. All right, let me see. I think we got another in the Q&A. All right, from Amy. What are the best practices for surveying commercial tenants? Is there a better time of year for surveying? Another great question that I will let you answer, Katie.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked that question. So, um, I would say there's a number of best practices. One is to communicate early about the survey program. Everybody these days gets a lot of emails from everyone, and it's really easy to ignore an email if you aren't, aware that it's really important for you to respond to it. So we actually provide this really great tenant success toolkit as part of the implementation process with all kinds of wonderful templates that you can use to kind of help promote the survey program early. Now, our implementation managers will walk you through that. And then once you've conducted the survey program, you're probably going to make some changes to your operations, your property as a result of that feedback. And one of the best things you can do is let your tenants know that you made changes because of what they said. And that really does a lot to build up long-term trust with the tenants, but also improve response rates over time.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Katie. All right, and thank you, Beth. Glad that you found this information helpful. All right, one last question, and it's a pretty simple one. I'll let you answer this one, Katie. Who answers the surveys?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the tenant. So that is typically the main tenant contact, someone that's either a lease decision maker or a day-to-day contact or both. So sometimes it's two people, sometimes it's one, depending on the tenant. But it's usually somebody very informed about, the whole operations of their company and interactions at the property. We do offer a separate survey program for occupants, so for everybody that works at that property. And that survey type is often needed for other important certifications like BOMA Best and Fitwell and LEED. So we kind of have everything to serve kind of every need you might have related to feedback.
Perfect. I love that. Yes, it was a simply worded question, but a very nuanced one that I thought was fantastic. So, all right, and we had another one come in here. Thank you. I'm glad you thought it was a great presentation. And the question is a question related to commercial amenities and creative quote solutions to age-old problems. Can you speak more to the levels of amenities? Are you seeing any effort to go quote back to basics for amenities, particularly for hybrid employees?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we measure kind of a set number of amenities on the survey. And if you're paying for a customized survey program, you can ask about your amenities that you have at your property. I would say some of the amenities we ask about aren't necessarily basic. But what we're generally seeing, and it was on one of the earlier slides that might help, Jen, if you go back to, I forget the slide number now. Um, it was one with lots of tables, so it's probably a little bit hard to read. It was slide 10. And all those tables are in the report. So I guess I'll say definitely check out the report because the same information will be in the report with this detail so you can kind of look at it on your own and spend a bit more time perusing it. And you can see the amenities that grew in importance kind of vary by property type. So some of them are kind of your basic amenities. Like for example, if we look at industrial, parking availability is a pretty basic amenity, a basic expectation. But then for other property types, like for office, for example, meeting spaces for large meetings, that's an amenity that increased in importance in 2025. But then may or may not be basic depending on the type of property you have. So, it kind of just depends on your tenant base. When I said creative solutions, I was just thinking that there's lots of services out there that again can kind of bring services to your property. If those amenities aren't just like walkable. So for example, dry cleaning services and what Jen mentioned with Minnow, that service of food lockers in the lobby. So if you're not located very close to, decent lunch options, Minnow could be a really great way to creatively bring in more food options because you can't control the rest of the built environment around you.
Yes, absolutely. Great points. And as you're reviewing this data, if you have more questions, please feel free to ping us, let us know. When we show the last slide, it has Katie and my email address. So we will leave that up for you as well. We're happy to dig into the data with you. Again, this is fun for us data nerds. So, all right, we had another question. Do your surveys also help with certifications and recertifications like with GRESB and WELL? Yes, short answer. I can help answer that. We are partners with GRESB and working on a partnership with WELL, but even so, we can do the occupant survey for WELL for you. So that is something that our surveys definitely can do for you. Our occupant survey can also work with BOMA Best, Fitwell, which we mentioned and quoted here as well, and LEED. So we've got you covered as far as the sustainability certifications. All right, and then another question here from Sarah. I'm curious why fitness centers or gyms aren't on a tenant's top wants. What are you hearing about workout facilities? Katie, I remember us talking about this last year, actually. So Sarah, let us send you the report from last year. We didn't cover this in the report this year just to mix it up and keep everyone on their toes and interesting and have the data change from what we're viewing from year to year. But we did see this in the top 25 categories of requests for what tenants want in a building, specifically on the office front. So as Katie mentioned earlier, the number 1 through like number 7 or 10 or something were all food related. So we tended to speak a lot about food delivery and whether that be at a restaurant or a cafe or a cafeteria or something like that. But fitness centers and workout facilities were also up there, as well as green spaces. I remember seeing that one. People wanted access to trails and nature. Also, I imagine for health benefits to be able to exercise and work out in that way. But yes, Sarah, happy to send. I think we have your email, so I can follow up with that. All right. I am not seeing any other questions, so I think we covered everything. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the end, just fly through these so that our emails are up there. You can email Katie. I'm offering up her email address as well as mine. Anytime, we are happy to discuss the data more with you. It is so fascinating to see what changes in tenant sentiment from year to year. Again, our team did such a fantastic job analyzing this data and preparing this report. Thank you all so much. And thank you everyone who attended and listened in today and offered your questions and insights on this data. We wouldn't do this if it wasn't for you. So we very much appreciate you. Thank you all. Have a fantastic rest of your day.